Hello, my name is Colleen Getty, and this is the Journey of a Story series with The Room to Write. And today we are sitting down with Betsy Ellor, and she is going to talk a little bit about her book, My Dog is Not a Scientist, and the writing process in general. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I feel like I've known you forever. We're finally getting to meet. So maybe talk to us about a little bit about, how did you get into writing and what does it look like when you write? Have you always been a writer? Do you write every day? Do you write, in a specific place? And what's that look like?
Yeah. So I have an office set up for writing, which I almost never sit at. I usually sit on my deck if it's warm enough, or just like on my kitchen table just inside the deck, because I like to have nature around me. And I have always been a writer. I've been writing since, I think I have like a spiral bound book that I wrote when I was like 10 or something. So I always have. My writing journey, in undergrad, I studied creative writing. And then I was a playwright coming out of college, and I like had some stuff performed around Boston. I was really into it. And then I had a play get picked up by a publisher that publishes plays, mostly for like high school market. And I was like, yes, this is the start of it. And it like sold like 2 copies. And I got so dejected. And then I stopped writing for 10 years. And then I came back. And then since then I came back with a much like different mindset and a different attitude. And like it's been a really good journey since then. So I've always been a writer, but I had like a little decade-long hiatus where I was just kind of scribbling stuff but not really doing anything with it. So,
okay.
Interesting journey.
Yes, and I want to ask you a little bit about your playwriting experience there.
So my undergrad degree was in theater design and creative writing. Mm-hmm. So obviously, like I was working in theater, like I was working as like a stagehand, designing sets, making costumes. So like playwriting was really just like how I thought. And definitely like whether I'm writing picture books or novels or short stories or anything, they almost always are all dialogue first, even though I now write prose. But I feel like that's kind of how I think. I write a lot of dialogue, and then I go back and I kind of fill in the setting and like the emotion and stuff. Like so you'll see my first drafts, and I'm like, this totally looks like playwriting, because it's like just that's kind of how I enter the story.
That's great.
So, and even with my picture books, like the first drafts are really dialogue heavy, which picture books usually don't have a lot of dialogue. Mm-hmm. So, but I guess that's just still like how I start when I'm thinking. So I think it's a weird entry point, but that's how my mind works, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like dialogue can be tricky for a lot of people. So it's almost like you're conquering what people struggle with a lot right off the bat. So do you just imagine the conversation happening in your mind, and you're just sort of sitting there listening, and you just sort of are eavesdropping and writing it down, and then you go back and look at where these people were sitting or acting in, or how's that go?
Yeah, I think so. I think too, like when I'm just like, so if I'm writing a longer work, like a novel, when I'm creatively just like thinking about it, like not actually writing, but just sort of like sitting with it, whatever, that seems to be where my mind goes, is like I'm having the characters talk to each other. So I feel like that's how I get a handle on it, like at first. But even with a picture book, I feel like when you have a story, or like if you're talking to your kids about something, a lot of times it is like a dialogue. So the book that I'm submitting right now is about tattoos, and so that's one I just finished. It's not sold yet, so I won't tell you too much about it, but it's like I was curious about tattoos, so I have done a billion drafts of it, but it was a lot of those drafts were like finding different characters that could like talk about tattoos and make it into a story. So it was like, because that's really how we relate to each other, is like through talking. So I think that's just, I'm like, I want to study tattoos, like what kind of conversations would happen around that with a kid.
Right, so that was a picture book that you're doing?
Yeah, so then that like developed from there, and then now there's like not any dialogue in it hardly, but like that was just like when I was trying to figure out where I was going with it, that was kind of the thing I was Googling with. Like that's where I started.
That's awesome, and I wonder if you could just even use some of that dialogue even when you kind of pitch it later to put into another story that happens to be talking about tattoos.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So you write all sorts of genres, it sounds like, playwright, novel, picture book, just for the sake of focusing, even though I wanted to hear about that playwright. What is where did this idea come from? And is this the very first picture book you ever wrote, or is this an anomaly?
This is definitely not the first one I wrote. This is my debut that was traditionally published. So it's my debut picture book. And I don't even know how many picture books I wrote before this. This one kind of is an anomaly in that, like, this particular picture book, it was inspired by just all the time I spent with my son and our dog, like, doing science experiments. And, like, my son and I would be doing experiments, and always, like, my dog was, like, getting in the way, helping, and, like, just sticking her nose in things and, like, making trouble. And we were talking about the scientific method one day, and it struck me that I'm like, well, my dog asks questions, and she's curious, and she uses her senses to make observations. And so I had this idea of, like, oh, like, is she a scientist? Like, is my dog a scientist? And then, so that is kind of where the story came from. And yeah, so this particular picture book, I was thinking about that. And then, like, my son went to kindergarten or whatever that next day. And in that day, I wrote, like, one draft. Like, it took a while. Like, I was writing a lot. But by the end of the first day, I had one draft. And then I really did, like, 2 revisions. Mm-hmm. And I had met someone at the publisher, Yahoo Press, earlier. And she had been telling me she was looking for STEM-oriented picture books. So I was like, oh, I'll send this to her. So I did one draft, 2 revisions, sent it in. And then a year later, they acquired it. And then I did a little bit more editing with them just to kind of, like, fine-tune the language and the page turns and stuff like that. But, yeah, mm-hmm. This one is an anomaly. The other one, like I said, the tattoo one that I'm just finishing now is, like, 800 drafts. Like, it looks nothing like where I started, and it is a different kind of a journey. So this was a little bit exceptional in that. And I think that what helped is just that I was really enjoying that moment with my son. And, like, I just enjoyed the story idea. I wrote it almost to make myself laugh because I didn't really – it didn't really occur to me that it was, like, a story because I didn't work that hard on it. But I think because I didn't work that hard on it, it all just flowed out. You can kind of sense that joy reading it. And I think that's what readers have responded to is that, like, it feels natural and joyful. Right. Because when I wrote it, I was just writing it for fun, and that came through.
And I feel like your method of writing dialogue first might lend itself to the scientific method. Yeah. Not that I'm a scientist, like your dog. But, that sort of give and take, that questioning back mm-hmm. and forth, and just trying to come up with something, it almost seems like it's a natural format for your
actually, I hadn't thought about it, but probably that's true because I think, like, a lot of the story, the main character, Yara, she's trying to win a science fair, and then there's, like, a neighbor who's trying to also win, who's, like, really kind of putting her down and telling her she's not a real scientist. But a lot of the story happens that, like, she's talking to the dog, and then the dog does something and she responds to it. So, but I think it's kind of nice because it's a child approaching science by talking to their pet. Right. So, there's no adult that's telling them, like, relaying the information. It's the child teaching the dog and, like, interacting with the dog.
Right. And I feel like there's that goes well with what they say to have kids read to animals because the animals aren't critical. They don't tell you if you mispronounce something. Yeah. So it's almost like, yes, in science you need to be able to be wrong a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why it's a great story because and that's, I think, what I pulled from is just, like, when you look at pets, they're naturally curious. They're, like, digging at things and sniffing things and testing things. And it's, they are scientists. So if your dog can be a scientist, then you can be a scientist. Anybody can be a scientist. So.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
It came very organically, this story.
Okay. And so you said you met the editor, was it, or a representative, or how'd that happen?
She is marketing. She's, like, the head of the marketing for Yahoo Press. I met her at a conference, and then we were just talking. I think we were, like, sat next to each other in, like, one of the workshops. And so that was kind of the in. Because I'm still unagented, but I feel like I've done really well. I love conferences, and we can talk about, the things that motivate me with my writing. But the people I meet, and I'm sure you feel this too because of what you do, but, that is what I love the most is, like, interacting with, like, my tribe of writers, like, my, like, community. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I've been very lucky to, like, connect with a few editors, just, like, enough that I, even as an unagented author, have a few, like, traditional publishing outlets that I can send stuff to. And go that route. So,
and I think a lot of people think you have to have an agent.
It would definitely help.
I feel like you're the second person I just talked to this quarter that they did submit directly to an editor. And, like you said, after doing a little research or whatever, networking kind of thing, especially at the conferences, but that is an avenue that you can go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important. And so I think, too, that being part of that community renews you. And so going to these conferences keeps you inspired. And it's like, I've definitely had low points where I'm like, ugh, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like I said, I had that period of my time in my life where I stopped writing. And I've had moments where I'm like, feel like going back to that. But then I'm like, ugh, I'd have to make all new friends because now all my friends are writers. So it keeps you buoyed up. But it's also in that process, you also like make business connections. Like I don't go out seeking business connections. I'm not like that like pushy about it, but like you just happen to find people that you like, or you're talking about something. Like I was talking to an editor for some place. I won't mention her name because she probably wouldn't want me to, but like we were just at a conference talking about swearing in young adult novels and whether you should or shouldn't.
Right.
And like from this conversation, she asked like what I was working on, and then she asked to see it. So yeah, I mean, It's like you're part of the community and you don't know where it goes, like going in without an agenda, but just being open, like the opportunities present themselves.
Right. And I think that's important for people to know, especially where we're in the age, and we were talking a little bit earlier about like social media, and everything seems like, oh, I just push this button and magically things happen. And especially in this business of publishing, there's no magically happening overnight anything. But I think it is like important to remember it is still relationships. It's still in reading. The reader and the writer have a relationship. So it seems natural that like an editor or an agent would want to know who you are, because your writing is going to come through with your personality.
Yeah, and editors work with you really closely. So like my editor on this had some really good insights. So Yihu, they publish in China and the U.S. simultaneously. So there were a few things that we discussed. There was a couple of things that they didn't know how it would play in international markets. My illustrator is also in Spain, so there'll probably be a Spanish language edition. Yeah. So, like they're looking globally at like how it's going to read in different cultural contexts. So there was one or two things I changed. It was minor, and there was one major thing that they wanted to change, and I'm like, that's going to change the whole story. And they were fine with like leaving it the way it was. So you're going to work with them in kind of an intimate relationship when you're talking about something personal to you, and just like having that. So I do think that I think they like knowing what they're walking into, like the kind of person that you are. So I definitely think it helps. And
I'm curious, so usually when you have an agent, they're the ones helping you with the paperwork and the contracts or whatever. Any insight or anything you learned, or how do you deal with that?
I was really intimidated by the contract and just looking for stuff. There was a couple of things I had questions about, and like you can't just ask the editor because like the publisher, because obviously, they're going to speak in their own best interest. So I did not use this, but somebody said, I think it's the Authors Guild. Like if you're a member, they will help review your contract for you. So there's some outlets like that. But I just...
did you do that?
I did not do that. Okay. But I am a part of a few different organizations. So I posted some questions I'm part of 12 by 12, the picture book community. And so I asked in our forum, like for other people who had gone through contracts, like, is this normal? Like, was this like, and then there's like very specific questions. So that helped. And then, so it was nice. And then there was some back and forth, and the publisher was pretty good. Like I didn't have any bad experience with that, but I definitely say it's a little intimidating when you're like, should I ask for more? Like, is this normal? You feel like, am I getting taken advantage of? Because it's such a totally different thing. But there's also online resources. SCBWI has like a part of like their reference book that will talk about contracts. So there's a good amount of resources out there for you to figure it out.
And it goes back to your point about having a community already before you get to there, so you can ask people questions. So the agent's not the only. That's not the end all be all. If you have one, great, but you can definitely make some progress in your journey with or without. So you wrote this in no time at all, even though you've written a gazillion other picture books.
Yes.
Is your heart with picture books? Is it with playwrights? Is it with novels? Like,
well, I haven't done any playwriting since. So I took that break, and when I came back, then it was all prose because it was like I feel more connected to it now, and I can build the world completely on my own without having to, like create something that really can't live without being produced.
People.
So now, like, if I can write a book, and if 10 people read it or like 1,000 people read it, it's functional on its own. So I definitely am. I'm all over prose now. I write a lot of picture books. I have a middle grade horror, light horror, that I'm querying right now, and then I have a couple adult novels that I'm querying a little bit. I might just put those out independently. We'll see. But yeah, so
did you say middle grade horror?
It is middle grade horror.
Okay.
I know, yeah. So I would say that with like a grain of salt because like middle grade horror isn't like Stephen King. It's like a little it's like my level of horror. I like to read middle grade horror because that's about how much horror I can handle.
Right.
But it's spooky as a ghost house, and it's that particular novel was inspired. I moved into a house next to a graveyard. And when I went walking through the graveyard, there were like 3 gravestones with my name on them.
Oh my Lord!
So the novel's called
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, the novel's called The Dead Betsy's, and it's
that's awesome.
And those 3 people were from different periods of time. So it's these 3 ghosts from different periods of history.
Oh, that's awesome.
That end up haunting this girl, but she doesn't know that at first. So like it's like she moves in, this house is haunted, and like everybody has her name, and she's like. So the main character is also Betsy, and so yeah,
that's awesome.
It was a fun story. It was a lot of fun to write. So it's horror, but it's got a lot of humor and other stuff too.
Okay, so we'll take that with a grain of salt. I mean, because I have been just recently at Agent Editor Day, and a few of the editors or agents mentioned they wanted horror, and I was like, really?
Yeah, I know, but like you should. Everyone should read middle grade horror because it's great because it's spooky and scary. But I can still sleep at night.
Okay. Not Stephen King.
Not Stephen King.
All right. So you went. So I'm curious because you're talking about the editor or the marketing person that was representing Yeehoo. Is that how you say it? Was talking about STEAM picture books or science-based picture books. And I think I was telling you earlier, there's a lot of great science picture books out right now.
Yeah.
So was this something that it sounded like you were already gravitating towards it, but have you done, like, is this, I mean, where is the line between nonfiction and the fiction of it, and how did you, like, balance that?
Carefully, I think, because like, the thing with picture books is they're meant to be read multiple times, over and over. And if you're really doing a good job, they'll be read over and over to the point where the parents don't want to read them anymore. And so I think informational fiction or nonfiction picture books, too, there's like 2 different kinds. This is informational fiction because it's a fiction story that conveys information. But
so wait a minute. Let me stop you there. Only because I'm curious. So there's informational fiction and nonfiction?
Yeah, so nonfiction would be like, this is a book about elephants. And there's a lot of information. Everything in it is factual.
Okay.
And informational fiction is like usually there's a fiction story that's along the way relaying information that will be new.
Is it
to
like
the reader.
Historical fiction except not historical? Like where there's
you can have
something
like,
based in history?
you can have where like you're giving a bunch of facts, but you don't notice you're getting the facts. So like I do the scientific method, and if you actually sit down and analyze the book, she goes through the scientific method step by step, and there's like a chart at the back, like in the back matter of the book that you can see, and like that she'll have a thing, and she does a piece of action, and then the dog ruins the experiment, and then the next time she goes through, so she'll go through like 1 step of the scientific method, and the next she goes through 2, and then 3.
Okay.
So like you don't notice it because it hopefully is subtle, but at the same time you're like the bones of what the scientific method is reiterated in every new misadventure she has with the dog. So it's relaying that to kids. So at the end, they have a really good understanding of like, if you're curious and you have a question, this is how you would pursue that question in a scientific way. You would make observations, or you ask a question, make observations, do an experiment, and like report your findings. Okay. I think I missed a step. But
we'll have to read the book.
You have to read the book. But yeah, like but the story is the story. So like, I have 3-year-olds who ask for this at bedtime because it's just a funny story with really funny illustrations.
Right.
And like a little heartwarming, like she thinks she fails, and just as she thinks she fails, she has this creative stroke of genius, and her dog like win the day at the end. So there's this like emotional story that's fiction. But then, you know, educators have been really positive about it because they can read it and the students enjoy reading it without feeling like they're being bombarded with information. But at the end, they can easily segue into, doing a science experiment and like that part of the classroom activity. So, yeah, that's kind of, and I feel like that's my sweet spot. Yeah. Like even The Dead Betsy's, like that novel I was just talking about. Like, it's a ghost story. It's full of suspense. But the 3 characters are from 3 different periods of like women's history. So like Revolutionary American, kind of like industrial revolution, and like women's suffrage. Right. So it's not heavy-handed, but along the way you're kind of, I like relaying information that's new to young readers. So
yeah, I love historical fiction, and I love it for kids too.
Yeah, so I think and that's kind of where my journey usually starts. Like I said, the tattoo book started because I just was really curious about the way little kids interact with tattoos and like what that means. Yeah. And then also for myself, like, why do so many people have them? Like, why have they been such a thing for all of time, since back to like, you know, earliest man? They've always been around. Like, what is this thing? And so it starts with a question. So I tend to write, no matter what I'm writing, whether it's for adults or kids or anything, it has a lot of curiosity. So my stuff all skews towards informational because that's, I guess, what I find interesting to pursue. Right. For the amount of time it takes to write something. Yeah. You spend a lot of time on it, so you got to really be passionate about it. Right.
Well, and I mean, I don't know, using historical fiction as an example, it's like you're enjoying a story and you're learning something all at the same time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like a win-win. So you wrote this. It sounds like it was an anomaly. It doesn't always, you have other things that haven't come to publication, but this one did. So you got it published on your own with reading your own contract, which I'm very impressed about. And now it came into the world in April, correct? Yeah. So what was that experience like, and what, you know, for people that, you know, there are a lot of people that have published, and then there's that part after you publish. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's been exciting. I feel like I have not had as much time for writing new stuff lately because I think I had a concept, but not as clear a concept of how much time the book marketing end takes. Okay. So I think whether you are...
And you have a day job.
And I have a day job.
And you have kids. You know, all those things, stuff. Right.
Yeah, so it's like... And I know this even from people I know who've published like 30 books, like, and this is their full-time gig. It's like marketing, social media, all that stuff is a black hole of time. So I think it's been great. I love doing events with kids. I've done, you know, quite a few. I usually do a science experiment. It's really fun to like read the book and then we do something together. So I love that. And I think I love like the in-person stuff. Social media is a drain. Like, I like doing it. I like interacting on social media, but I definitely feel like it empties my bucket. It doesn't fill it as much. I like doing featured authors, like where I'm writing something, especially if I'm writing, you know, advice or something where I feel like I'm giving back to people. But I think that's been really interesting for me. Is just
what's featured authors?
Oh, so like a lot of magazines that sell to like, you know, readers, like online sources that like, you know, go to parents. They publish for parents to recommend books. Okay. They'll like have a featured author. Oh. So like if you're writing, sometimes it's, you know, a blog that's for writers and then you're writing writer's advice, or sometimes it's for parents and teachers and you're like, this is how you can use this book to teach, or, you know, whatever wisdom they want.
And so how do you find out about those types of things to write about or for?
I think, well, so my publisher did give me a list of some, so that was a start. And then I am part of a picture book debut marketing group. So there's like 8 or 9 of us that are all have book debuts this year. So we share resources. So we're like, oh, I heard about this place. I heard about that place. So like that's been really good to like trade information.
Is this the 12 by 12?
No. Okay. This is, I know.
There's so many.
I know. And that's just it. Like you have to like find what's the best use of your time.
Right.
And sometimes it changes. So like I was really involved in 12 by 12 this year, less because I'm more involved in this marketing group because that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Right.
But this marketing group came out of people I met from 12 by 12. So it's all.
Because if I understand it, and I probably don't, is 12 by 12 more like you're generating content?
Yeah.
And now that you have your published book.
Yeah, it's the 12 by 12 picture book challenge, which is a great way to get started. If anybody is interested in writing picture books, they do great webinars that teach you a lot about the craft and the business. But the name comes from the goal is to write 12 picture book drafts in a year, so one draft a month. And it doesn't mean you have to polish them and perfect them. It's just about generating ideas for picture books and then continuing to work on your craft. But that's been a great group. SCBWI is great. And this other group is sort of just a team of us that share resources. But
okay, so it's your own thing you made up.
Yeah, but I think I've said, like the community is important, so that you kind of reach out, and then publishing is slow, so I signed the acquisition, and the book came out like 18 months later, which is actually fast because I feel like a lot of people, it's like 3 years between when you sign the contract and when the book actually comes out. So 18 months is not that bad, but I had 18 months. So
you could have 2 babies in that time, but that's fast in the publishing world.
Exactly. I know. You write it. When I write it, my child was that age, and now he's, like grown out of picture books. He's like, middle school now. So, but yeah, so I had 18 months too to keep my ears open to the community and just go in search of, like I went and like, okay, where is selling to like, audiences that would be interested in science books for kids and that stuff. So, and then just I kept like a list. And then when it was close, I just sent an email out. I had, like a 1-page sheet that told about the book. And like, I'm like, here's the selling features. Like, you want to interview me? And like, or do you want to feature me? Or I'll write a feature for your blog or your website or whatever. So, yeah. And it's a lot of work.
And you're enjoying that part too.
I am. So, this is kind of where I started with that is I think that one thing I've learned is just you only have so much time and energy. Mm-hmm. So you got to pick and choose. And I think definitely like if I'm lucky enough to have more books come out, we'll say when, I will be smarter next time because I definitely now have seen, I'm like, okay, these things drained me. Okay. And then I didn't have energy to do other things. And, these felt like they had less of a return on investment than these other things.
Right.
And I think that's different for everybody. Like some people love social media.
Right.
That is not my forte.
Yeah.
And so I do a little, I do enough, but then I'm like, okay, I'm going to focus more on trying to like sign more events and like do more like in-person stuff where I can like talk to people because I do better with that.
Right. And I think that's important because I was going to say, so what are the secret things you should do? And then you made a great point. Everyone's superpowers are different.
Yeah.
And so you really, that's probably the good thing about the first book, and the hard thing is you learn a lot, but it's all very personal and you can only learn it that way.
Yeah. And I think we were talking about this too, that like social media versus the newsletter. Like I think it's the same. Like I actually didn't really do a lot with my newsletter, but I've been doing more. And I have readers, which I'm like, at first I was like, oh, newsletters, are they like old fashioned? Do people still read these? But the count of people signing up for it has been a lot higher than I thought. And for me, I'm like, I'll write a newsletter like every month, every 2 months, whatever you want. But I like social media, like pumping out like 2 or 3 of those, even though it's much less words, it just doesn't do it for me. Like it makes me tired. So I'm like, okay, so I got to focus more on this. Maybe just enough on that and like balance my energy.
Right.
So that, because otherwise I'll burn out and then I won't do anything. So
right. And that's important is keeping yourself sane and keeping yourself alive.
Yeah. And also saving time to do the part that you enjoy, which is the actual writing.
Right.
So yeah. Like,
and so when do you do that? Any tips?
I'm actually switching. So I recently went back to working full time and I work early. So I have always written at 5 a.m.
Oh, my Lord.
I know. And I'm an early riser, but now that my morning routine is so tight with like getting the kid ready, getting the dog ready, getting out the door to
He's
school.
A scientist, so.
Yeah. So, I got to keep her like contained because she's like super smart. But yeah, like I find my morning 5 to 6, which has always been my religious, like I'm going to protect this, has been getting nibbled into a lot more. So I've started to write. I'll still get up at 5, but some days if I'm just not up for it, I write at night now. Which before I would never really wrote at night because I just wanted to relax. But now I actually find my writing is like a refreshing thing that I can do at the end of the day. So, but I think that my tip would just be whether you're a morning person or a night person, or if it's your lunch break, just like pick a time, even if you only do it 3 times a week, and like protect it, like block it out on your calendar because we're all busy and it's hard to protect that time.
Yeah.
And it's like an hour or 3 hours a week doesn't feel like a lot, but if you add it up, like it's a lot. Like you can write a novel. There was I read it somewhere. Like there's, if you like 1,000 words. I don't remember. It's like 1,000 words a day is like a novel in a year. Yeah. Yeah, but not 1,000 words a day. That would be a crazy amount. Like 1,000 words a week.
Okay.
Is a novel in a year? Is that right? I don't know.
12,000.
No, that's not.
No, 56,000. Yeah.
Okay.
What is it, like 53 or 56 weeks in a year? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so I mean, like you crank it out. Like it's, it might take you a couple years to edit it and revise it and get it just right. But if you chip away, you get there. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing we're running out of time, and already. You did just give us some really great advice. But I'm going to ask you for one last sort of anything that you didn't get to mention, or that you think the viewers would benefit from knowing from your experience.
Yeah, I think I said it, but I'll just reiterate it, that I think the most important thing is just to find what you do it for and like build around that, because it is a long, slow journey to whatever you consider success. So you have to be able to enjoy the journey. I feel like the writers I know that are focused on selling a number of copies or like getting a book traditionally published or winning an award where there's like this one finite thing that means success tend to last a certain amount of time and then get burned out. But if you're just enjoying each step of the process, then the whole thing is a joy. It's not like you're working to get somewhere. You're just enjoying the whole process.
Right.
And I think that will make you happier and make you in it for the long haul, which writing is definitely a long haul. So it's a joyful long haul, but
right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the marathon.
It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
We're writers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This has been so interesting. I love this book. It is so funny. If people haven't seen the trailer, I think it's hilarious. You did a great job with it. So
great. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in and talking to us.
Thank
or
you.
Me. So if you'd like to join us in the hot seat where Betsy's sitting right now, please feel free to contact theroomtowrite.org or email me at Colleen@theroomtowrite.org.